now. Don't want anyone to think we're not being transparent. Give me a sec. And go ahead.
Transparent.
You're good.
Okay, I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Finance Committee Monday, March 30th at approximately 5:03 p.m. Can I have a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Councilor Romana Beta,
Here.
Councilor Jamie Cassette Sanchez,
Here.
Councilor Sidney Lindell,
Here.
Councilor Renee Villarreal,
Present.
Councilor Carol Romero Worth.
Present.
You have a quorum, Mr. Chair.
Okay, the next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, changes from the committee. Is there a motion regarding the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Councilor Lindell will say made the motion, and who made a second?
Cassette
Councilor
Sanchez.
Sanchez.
Okay, because that's made second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, approval of the consent agenda. Are there items that we're gonna pull out the consent agenda? Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Move to approve.
Okay, that's Councilor Lindell, move to approve.
Second.
Second by Councilor Renee Villarreal. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Okay, approval of the minutes. We have the regular Finance Committee meeting minutes of March 2nd, 2020. Are there any changes from staff?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Eddie? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second. I think Jamie said it though.
I move to approve. I'm not sure who got the first motion. A lot of people want us to pass this.
Okay,
Okay.
I got it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Okay, approval of the Finance Committee meeting minutes of March 16th, 2020. Are there changes from staff? Any changes from staff with those minutes?
No changes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anything from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 Those
Aye.
opposed, motion carries. Okay, so our first item on the agenda is a presentation, which is the second quarter financial update. Ms. McCoy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and councilors. So as we normally report to you on a quarterly basis, this report is a financial summary of our financial results for the city through the first half of FY20. So that's through December 31st of 2019. At the time of publication of this report, the magnitude of the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on city revenue sources is unknown. So that being said, this report does not include, as it normally does, a projection of our revenues for the remaining fiscal year or a projection of our expenditures. So given the decline of the city revenue, the city is re-evaluating our planned expenditures, what you all voted on last year in our April budget hearings for the remainder of FY20. So we will be coming back to you with an update in the next few months about the status of those expenditures. So moving on to our revenue and our expenses through the end of December. The main takeaway from this report is that the city's economy and our financial performance for the city through December 31st was very strong. The largest single source of revenue to the city, as you all understand, is our gross receipts tax, which has increased over the same period last year by 15%. And this was also overperforming our budgeted expectations. So that is the good news. Just as a reminder, our GRT is 67% of our general fund revenues, so a very large portion of our general fund revenues, and 29% of our all funds revenue, which is all of the city's funds, including our utilities funds, combined in with our general fund. So Clayton Pelletier, our interim controller, is joining us today, and he will be reviewing our second quarter GRT, property tax, and lodger's tax revenue with you in a moment. Let's see, moving on to our expenditures. In the tables in the report, the tables represent actual expenses through the first half of the fiscal year, which are less than 50% of the budgeted level. As of the first half of this fiscal year, our major expenditure categories, like our salaries and our benefits, were only at 45% and 45% of the all funds budget. And as you might remember from previous presentations, our salaries and benefits categories are the largest expense of our general fund at 66%. And they make up a smaller portion of our all funds budget. As far as the non-personnel costs, I was able to pull, Fran Dunaway and her team were able to pull for us tonight, that as at the end of the third quarter, which is today, we have about 2,027 open POs for a total of 51 million unspent at the moment. So these are the types of stats as we move forward. These are the areas where we're going to be looking to see expenditure savings for the 4 months of the fiscal year or the 3 months of the fiscal year that remain as of today. Our investment portfolio will be reviewed by Bradley Fitch, our planning and investment officer. And our investment portfolio has also performed extremely well in the first half of FY20. He will share those results with you in a moment as well. And he will also share that we have made a few strategic changes in our portfolio composition in the last few weeks to adjust for the current financial crisis that we are in. And finally, as you all are aware, the US government's monetary and fiscal policy response to the coronavirus pandemic is unprecedented and will undoubtedly be welcome support to both the private sector as well as us in the public sector as this crisis continues. So I want to close the summary of this by saying that our staff has been working diligently, some of whom join us today, to continue to closely monitor our city revenue and our expenditure profile, and we will make adjustments where necessary in the months to come, as we also see declines in our revenue. But I wanted to focus you on the fact that this is an update through the first half of the fiscal year, where our revenues were performing very strongly. So with that, I will turn it over to Clayton Pelletier, our interim treasury officer, to review GRT, property tax, and lodger's tax with you.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Go ahead, Clayton.
Mr. Chairman, council members, good afternoon. The numbers I'm presenting are for the first 6 months only, although I've given you more information. If you've got this report, it goes all the way through actual March receipts. Now, my work is on a cash basis, so there is a difference between that and the accounting for it. So there's just, that's been explained, I believe, but my reporting is what we've received on a cash basis. So far for fiscal 20, we have exceeded the receipts of fiscal 19. If I can get, okay. 65.9 million revenues earned in the first half of FY20 as compared to, bear with me, I'm trying to read the narrative here. This is a different format of presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Councilor Romero Worth.
is it possible to know what page of the report he's looking at?
This looks like page 7.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Council Villarreal, can you make sure that whoever's on the call with us, whether it's on the phone or video, to make sure to mute so there's no feedback?
Yeah, let me see. I might have that. I might have the ability to do that.
Well, this is not in Excel format and I can't add it up. I didn't open up my tables. In my narrative, I'm not seeing where I'm telling you what the first 6 months of FY19 were compared to 20. My apologies. And if you wish, I can open up that Excel sheet and quickly come up with totals for you if you like.
Okay, yes, you can do that.
Now I'm experiencing that server lag that we discussed before the meeting started. Okay, I have it in front of me now. Thank you for your patience. Okay, now I'm going to be presenting on a cash basis for the first 6 months of FY20. We received 65.5 million. And I'm going off the table rather than the narrative, but in FY19, we received 6,800,000. So the increase for the first 6 months was almost $5 million on a cash basis.
Clayton,
Okay.
can you explain to the committee what you mean by a cash basis very briefly? And then we can go ahead and move on and just discuss the actuals for the first 6 months, the actual revenue that we will be attributing to the first 6 months in FY20 as is indicated in the narrative in the report.
Yes, I'd be glad to. What my report represents on a cash basis is the actual wire transfer we received from the Taxation and Revenue Department. So for instance, in the month of October, we would receive 10,288,000 from Taxation and Revenue. That would be for gross receipts earned for the month of August. There's a 2-month lag from when it's earned by the time it takes Tax and Rev to report and remit to us. So if I was going to be looking at it from a general ledger accounting point of view, I'd be 2 months different from what I'm presenting to you now. So this is based on the wire transfers that actually come to us from Taxation and Revenue. Any questions on that?
And just to be clear, on page 7, like you referred to, that's what we're seeing under October FY20 on that chart, right? The 10,288,820.
Yes, sir. That's the wire transfer that came into the city in the month of October.
Okay, and then compared to the month of October FY19, there's an increase of $250,000 more or less.
You are exactly correct.
Okay,
And that's why I went to my Excel sheet so I could total those 6 months up all at once and give you the total numbers.
okay, and then give that to us again. The total is,
I'd be glad to.
yes,
On a cash basis, for the first months of FY20, we received 65,500,000.
Okay,
And on a cash basis in FY19, we received 60,800,000, almost $5 million increase in FY20.
okay, all right. Okay,
Any more questions on gross receipts tax? We're kind of giving you a overview here. But we can dig into it if you have questions.
any other questions?
I think the graph is very helpful in this case, where you can see FY20, how well it was tracking right up until February. We were doing extremely well, and this is what Mary was indicating. And it's visual on this graph to see what we were tracking compared to the previous 5 years. That's on
Okay.
page 7 as well.
And how about in regards to what we budgeted?
We budgeted, we're at 58.5% of the budgeted revenue for the first 6 months. And I believe that was calculated based on the accrual method. So we're giving consideration to that 2-month timing, because the budget is prepared on that same accrued basis that agrees with the financial statements. The general ledger is kept on the accrual. But on that basis, we were tracking 58.5% of the total year's budget we'd received in the first 6 months. So to be clear, that includes the months of May and June of FY19 all the way through only October, my actual cash receipts. And I have my Excel spreadsheet, so I can actually tell you what those numbers are for the 4 months on the accrued basis. It is 61.9 million compared to a budget of, I believe that was 112,000. I mean, 112.7 million.
Right,
So that's where we calculated that 58.5%. So numbers aren't in front of you. They're on my Excel spreadsheet on that accrual basis.
okay, great.
We good with
Okay.
this? receipts?
I think the reason that it is important to understand the cash versus accrual is because the revenue that we are seeing now in the month of March was actually earned in the month of January. So as a city, we will not actually, on the first full month of economic impact will actually be April of 2020. This next month, starting tomorrow. So we will not receive that revenue into the city until the end of June, which is the end of our fiscal year. That's why it's extremely important for us not to wait for June to start rolling back the expenditures that we're making as a city. So at
Okay.
this time, and I think that's why Clayton is going into such detail about the cash versus the accrual method, we will see an impact. The first impact to our GRT that we are expecting to see will be in the month of May. That being said, we do have this modified accrual basis of accounting. So the revenue that is earned in April, May, and June, we will not receive until June, July, and August. So there is this delay as we are closing out our fiscal year, which is extremely important for us to understand.
All right,
I'm thinking that the actual cash we receive, the wire transfer that comes in next month in April, is still going to be based on February activity. And I don't believe we saw the real effect of the turn down that month. So I'm agreeing with Mary that it's the May receipt where we're going to see quite a decline from the FY19 number.
okay. So let's continue with the report. And then before we finish this topic, let's talk about what kind of changes you're proposing for the end of this fiscal year or the last quarter of the fiscal year.
If that's directed to me, I'm not proposing any changes. We have to get back together and evaluate this.
Yeah, no, what it's directed to Mary.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So let's finish the report, Mary, and then we'll talk about you know, and I know right now it's all conceptual and there's a lot of kind of guessing, but I think the committee would like to have an idea of what the administration's thinking about. Okay, so what's next on the report?
That's going to be property taxes, and I'm bringing up my Excel sheet in case we have a need for me to add those up too. There's a 1 month lag with property taxes as opposed to the 2 month lag with the gross receipts tax. Okay,
Okay.
so I have that up in front of me now. I'm going to be moving to page 8.
Okay,
So the real quick recap of what happened is the middle of the second paragraph, the property tax received during the first 6 months, this is cash basis, was 4.3 million in FY19 and 2.1 million in FY20. And the reason for that is there was a piece of legislation that affected the county, House Bill 407, that caused them to get their property tax bills out late. We did receive, if you look at the table that's just below that, after December, you can see how January was a catch-up month. But in just reporting the first 6 months, we were off by 2.2 million as opposed to FY19.
okay,
And we only caught, well, yeah, I've got January and February posted there, so I believe we caught up most of that. In if I go all the way on my Excel sheet, bear with me. Through January in FY19, we received 6.95, and in FY20, 5.5. We're still off, but not off as severely as it would indicate just looking at the first 6 months.
okay, and how far off are we?
How far off are we? What is the question?
How far off in collections? Because you gave us a number of 0.2 million, but now it looks like it's a little less than that.
Yes. Yes. Oh, I see what you're saying. As compared to FY19, rounding to 7 million compared to 5.5, we're still off for the entire first 7 months. We're still 1.3, 1.4 million less than FY19.
Okay. And I assume, Mary, that we budgeted based off of FY19, right? So we're a little less than what we budgeted also.
Mr. Chairman, we actually budgeted off of FY18. As you
Okay.
can see from the chart, let me pull up the chart, FY18 was higher. It was for the total distribution month, July through June, about 11.5 million. That's the table that's included on page 8.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this, so in FY19, we actually saw a dip in property tax, and we are expecting to be pretty much on target in the current fiscal year. That being said, that was the original projection. Unfortunately, as I mentioned in the report, it is very realistic for us to expect the payment distribution in May and in June to be lower due to the economic crisis and the loss of income. So unfortunately, we are looking at a downturn in that as well. We do have a bit of good news for the city as a whole, that we have reached over $13 billion in valuation, in assessed valuation, as opposed to the taxable valuation. So we are continuing to work with the county treasurer, the county assessor's office, to pull down information and data to help us understand how the valuation has increased over those 2 years, but our property tax has actually decreased. So that analysis is still pending, and we are working with the county to help get the data for us to understand those trends better.
Okay, and property tax, it's the second half that's due in April that people have to pay, property owners? Okay. And do we know, is there any, like we've talked about relief for rent payments, relief for mortgage? Has there been any action in regards to property tax relief or extensions for property tax payments?
Mr. Chairman, not to my knowledge, I am not sure that the county actually has the ability to defer or waive any of those payments.
Okay, but as far as we know, the state hasn't done that.
No, not to my
Okay.
knowledge.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's property tax. What's next? Lodger's tax?
Lodger's tax,
Okay,
again, on page 9, the middle of the second paragraph. Lodger's tax revenue earned for the first 2 quarters of FY19, 7.1 million, as compared to 7.8 million in FY20. So it's been going up every single year, as the table on the same page would indicate. There's been a constant rise. And if I didn't open up the Excel sheet on Lodger's tax yet, but I can do that for you.
Terrible word thing. Yeah. But now I can do it, and I can prove it to you. I was told my creative math, I'm not knowing anybody. I was told my creative math.
And I think Mary will have to weigh in on how that budget was put together as well. So for FY20, for the first 6 months, we received the 7.3, we received 6.5 in FY19. I forget what I was looking for there. But when I look at the next 3 months that I've got posted, we are also in excess by a slight amount, by about 400,000 more for the next 3 months over FY19 as well. So Lodger's tax was doing well. It was continuing to track higher right up until this issue hit, and we will see the effect of that in April, 1 month earlier than we'll see the effect of the gross receipts tax.
I think it's really important to note at this point that the city has delayed deferred payment of the lodger's tax under the mayor's executive order. That being said, we are still requiring entities to report, even though they will not be remitting payment. This is extremely important for us to be able to understand exactly what Clayton is referring to, how starkly lodger's tax has declined in the month of March, given the current crisis that we're in.
now, Mary, am I correct in that lodger's tax, doesn't make up any of our general fund revenues, right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. This goes to fund primarily the convention center as well as the Arts Commission.
Okay, all right, thank you.
I do want to point out on the bottom of page 9, there's just a quick graph of this current year, but I did go all the way back to fiscal 15. And the ratio of short-term rentals to the hotel motel, it was 5%. And it was 5% in FY15, FY16. Then it started rising in FY17, 18 to about 10%. FY19 and 20, it's been 15%. So we as a city have done a good job of bringing in more of these smaller property owners to report their lodger's tax. And that is one of the contributors to this constant rise year after year, is more participation from the property owners.
And just as a point of clarification on that, 5% in FY15 equated to about 500,000, just under 500,000. And at the end of FY19, that 16% equated to about 2 million. So we've quadrupled the revenue that we are bringing in from this sector. We know that there is much more to be done, as the study last year indicated, and we look forward to continuing to work with legal and land use to maximize those revenues from the short-term rental industry in the city. And as
Okay.
Clayton mentioned, he has also done this analysis with the breakout month by month, which we can email to the committee. I believe this was a request of Councilor Carol Romero Worth at our last quarterly update. So since then, Clayton has performed this analysis, and we can show you the breakdown between the short-term rental and the hotel motels going back for the entire 5-year period.
Okay. Okay, what's next?
We'll move on to our investment update and the portfolio update. Brad did give you a highlight at our last finance committee meeting, but I'll turn it over to him now to give you the update through December 31st, as well as some of the strategy changes that I referred to in the summary.
Okay, go ahead, Brad.
Brad, please unmute your microphone.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mary. I just want to let sure everybody know that this is not a beanie. It is a ceiling fan. So with that said, I'll get on with the. So the investment portfolio did very well. We've maintained a 2% return on the investment through the second quarter. We earned roughly 1.35 million. Year to date, the portfolio has earned 2.7 million. However, we know that in March, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates March 18th, and then they cut rates later in the month to effectively zero. So at least we've earned income for January, February, and March. However, April, May, and June, the portfolio earnings will be negligible. When we get farther down and we look at, and I'm on page 10, when we look back at, say, chart 6 on page 11, look back at what we earned in, FY16. That's what the bar is going to look like for April, May, and June. Otherwise, we added $20 million to the portfolio as a net transfer in. That's more or less from the robust tax collection that Clayton discussed for the first half of the year. On page 10, the composition of the portfolio, and this really gets to the heart of the strategy that Mary had talked about. So right now, most of the portfolio, the green bar, is money market mutual funds. And the purple is individual government securities. So we have a large investment in money market mutual funds. About 40% of them were in government funds, and the other 60% was in prime money market funds. The difference is government funds only invest in government securities, treasuries, and agencies. The prime money market funds invested in government securities, but also commercial paper, corporate notes, bank loans, banker acceptance notes, mortgage-backed securities, asset-backed securities for credit card and auto loans, but more of a full market. The transaction that we did is in other financial crises. What happens is the financial markets, especially the short-term money market, seize, and you can't move your money and you're stuck where you are. This happened in 2009 when we had the financial crisis. It happens routinely during these type of events. Given that, I suggested to both Mary and Clayton, the treasurer, that we need to move out of the prime funds and move that money into government funds. One of the things about the prime funds is when financial markets seize, they have a thing called a gate, and it limits the access you have to your money, and you can't withdraw it when you want it. And that's what happened in the money market funds after we divested 50 million from the prime funds and moved to the government fund. So we were making sure that we had the liquidity we need. So we effectively reduced our investment in prime funds in half. So the last chart is total investment income by month. This goes through the month of February. You can see that in the light blue, that's current fiscal year 2020. We've had a good year so far. Again, I'm really expecting March to be somewhere between, down from February, but about half as much. But then it would be looking more like the darker blue bar. It would be very negligible investment income. Given that, with the yield curve as low and as flat as it is, there's really no reason for us to take any interest rate risk. One of the differences between government funds and prime funds is we don't take a lot of interest rate risk. What we take is credit risk. Now that the Federal Reserve has taken action and basically said QE indefinite to infinity, the markets have unseized. There's now liquidity back into the money markets, but we also saw the one-year T-bill last week actually have a negative yield. And that's when somebody would buy a bond knowing that they are going to pay $101 and in 90 days get $100 back. Never seen that before in the US. They have it in Europe, but not so much here. So now that the Fed has taken action, we're going to leave our duration. There's no reason to take any interest rate risk moving out the yield curve. There's just no value in it. And so we're going to stay in the money market funds and short-term, less than 1 year securities, and earn, anywhere from 1/4 to 0.5% until this is over. If anybody has any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Okay, so Mary, does that conclude our report?
Yes.
Okay, let me open it up to questions and comments from the committee. Any questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just had a clarifying question from what Brad was saying about the difference between primary money market funds and government money market funds. So when you said it was good that we took out our investments from the primary money market because you can't have access to it, they freeze the money. But what happens when you move the money into the money market, the government money market fund, considering that's, from what I hear, somewhat volatile as well? So what's the advantage?
Liquidity. Government securities, you can always get a bid, which is somebody offering to buy your security, where you may not get someone to bid for your, Microsoft commercial paper or GE or Ford, pick anybody out there. Investors may not want to own that for 90 days. Nobody has a problem owning a US Treasury or a government agency. They can always sell it.
Okay. And then the other question I had, I think Chair, you mentioned about the property tax. So when you look at our overall revenue at the beginning, and it shows the percentage that year to date and property taxes at 15%, does that mean that we just haven't collected because of the time period of collections for property taxes? And I know it's a month behind as well, but I'm just curious, do we make that up in the next months? I mean, I know it won't be what we think it or what we projected, but is that why it's low, that a big chunk comes later on because of when we file? I'm just trying to remember.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, that's a great question. Yes, there is a month lag, and also this report is as of December 31st.
Yeah.
So everything that we have received. So if you recall back to the conversation that Clayton had about cash versus accrual. So everything that is reported through December 31st is what we will attribute to FY20 and what had already been received at that time. And so the month of December had not been received as of December 31st. And that was a significant amount, as you can see on the chart, the table rather on that same page for property tax, as well as another bump in the month of January.
Okay, just checking on that. And then I think you're going to talk a little bit more about possible projections for revenue in a bit here. So I'll yield the floor.
All right. Any other questions regarding the report, specific to the report? Okay, Mary, will you talk to us now about what you've been thinking as far as cuts we're going to have to make in this fiscal year? And then later on under the agenda, we'll talk about next fiscal year. But we know that given what's going to happen now, March, April, I'm sure you're considering some types of cuts. So what are you guys thinking? And then what role do we have as the finance committee when it comes to that?
Great. Thank you for those questions. Mr. Chair, councilors, the way that we're looking at this is in two buckets. It's our expenditure levers and our revenue levers. We know that the revenue is decreasing, so now we have to start pulling some of these expenditure levers to be able to have a balanced budget. At this time, as I mentioned before, salaries and benefits are the largest general fund expense at 66% of the total expenditures. So, and I believe we have also reviewed this with you in prior presentations as the primary spot where we would start pulling those expenditure levers. At this time, we do have 260 vacant positions across all funds, not just the general fund. So our plan going forward will be to hire mission critical positions of those 260 that are currently vacant as of Friday, the 27th. And going forward, as vacancies through attrition or retirement do open up, we will look through our criteria for mission critical to determine if the position is mission critical. And then we'll allow that to go forward with a job advertisement. Similarly, on our benefits side, this will be something that is does not impact FY20, but benefits, as we have also presented to the group in during prior finance committee meetings, benefits are a significant cost to the city. I believe our Aon benefits consultant asked us if there was anything better than the Cadillac plan. What would be the next tier, a platinum or a higher tier than a Cadillac? And that's exactly what the city offers as far as our health benefits currently. So it's a very generous plan. And those are the types of changes that we look forward to working with this committee on that would impact FY21 and not the current year. Moving on, as I mentioned, we have over 2,000 purchase orders that are open as of today, the end of the third quarter. So our staff will start to work with department director to review what those open POs are for. It totals about over 50 million of unspent expenditures at this time. So we can realistically understand that if our libraries are closed or our rec centers are closed or city buildings are closed to the public, that we will be able to see a savings from the expenses that would normally we would be spending for those facilities.
Right.
So those are a few highlights of that. Also travel. is another large category. And since we are limiting travel, as also the mayor and the governing body have discussed previously, that will also be a savings going forward. Our procurement team is also working on, for the current year as well as into FY21, citywide procurement. So what does that mean? It means working on invitations to bid or RFPs for basic city equipment or supplies or services that everyone in the entire city uses. So as opposed to buying a medium priced box of pens, we'll be able to source a cheaper box of pens for everyone in the city. So being able to make smarter decisions as we go forward and being able to use some of our levers, like our procurement team, issuing citywide invitations to bid for these key products.
Okay, and then as far as these short-term changes or actions, is that something that the mayor has the authority to take himself, or does he have to get approval from the governing body to, or are you researching that?
Mr. Chairman, we did speak with the Department of Finance and Administration today, and their guidance to us going forward, not just for the current year, but also for the next fiscal year, is to continue to adjust our budget through the budget adjustment process that we normally handle. We can adjust our budget, as you all do every 2 weeks, by voting on budget adjustment resolutions. We can adjust it upwards, or we can also adjust it down. So if we determine that we need to shrink our budget, we can come back to the Finance Committee and the governing body through this budget adjustment process, which would then be reported to the Department of Finance and Administration. That being said, as far as cutting expenditures, we look forward to working with you to understand where your priorities are in terms of reducing services or reducing different budget line items. And I think this group is very well equipped to be able to give us some guidance and advice on that. But those are measures that we will be taking internally, as we do not have to come back to the council for a vote. But we do look forward to working very closely with you and reporting back to you as these changes are made.
Okay, I want to open it up to the committee. What are your thoughts on these short-term cuts? Let's start with Councilor Romero-Worth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mary, for all this information. These are going to be tough times. I'm curious if you have any sense of where we may feel the greatest impact in terms of cutting, like where are our mission critical expenditures focused? Is there do you have a sense of that?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero-Worth, mission critical are definitely the direct services that the city is continuing to offer at this time. So public health and safety, for example, our police department, our fire department, as well as our utilities, providing clean drinking water, continuing to provide trash pickup. And it's important for us as a group also to really understand what the city is legally required to do. What are the services that the city is legally required to provide as we move forward, just as a baseline, not that we're going to cut back to that level, but just to understand, where we stand legally with services that we are absolutely required to provide.
Sorry, I had to unmute again. And is that something that you are compiling so that we kind of understand where that kind of bottom is? And then we can, I don't know, understand, I don't know, is that the right way to go about this? Understand then what we can do beyond that, given where our revenues may be?
Yes, I think for the current fiscal year, we will be looking at is those 260 vacant positions and more as they become vacant. So we can provide you with a list of those, and working with HR, working with the city manager and the mayor and the departments, understand kind of the first cut, what they deem as mission critical. And then we can share that with you.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that, I think it would be important to know more information about those 2,000 POs. You know, where are they clustered, and how much give is there to help us out?
Yes, we can get you that information.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councillor Romero Worth covered some of my questions. I think what I was wanting to understand is, again, about the POs, and what are those projects that are just in the pipeline that need to be completed and it just takes a while, like some of the POs often are, or if it's just stuff that we have open that can wait. And I guess that's why I would like to understand that analysis. And then I think Fran and I talked a little bit about this, but when we're talking about citywide procurement, just doing things smarter, she explained a little bit to me about that. Maybe you can share a little bit more about what that means. You gave example of pens, but it was also like thinking about fleet and thinking about ways that when we order, it's not just per department, it's like citywide, and that we're getting a cost savings because of the way we're ordering or purchasing. So I don't know if you or Fran would want to just elaborate on that.
Yeah, so if Fran is on the line, she can definitely add on. I think you brought up a great, Councillor Renee Villarreal, you did bring up a great point about fleet, right? And that's the type of analysis that we're going to start looking at. And the team already had for the FY21 budget. Is it cheaper to, I think Brad's term was to create a Southwest model for our fleet, where we use, all of the same type of pickup trucks or all of the same types of administrative sedans across the city. In addition to that, is there something that we can do to that we can lease that might be a little bit more, a little bit cheaper over the short run, as opposed to purchasing outright? So I will turn it over to Fran so she can, given her experience, walk us through a few additional ways where we as a city team can use procurement to work smarter.
There you go.
Hi. I think you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Hello, Mr. Chair and Council. Yes, I did have a discussion with Councilwoman Villarreal the other day. We did talk about some ways of saving, and the citywide price agreements are important to me. I just launched one for on-call services for on-call services for janitorial services. I just launched it. It is going out and will be up on April 3rd. And that is critical for the city's needs right now with all the cleaning of buildings and different offices and such. So we did our first launch, yay. I'm excited about that. But the other types of procurements we were looking into and that I did discuss was also the fleet. We were talking about fleet vehicles, exactly what Mary said, to see if everybody can, cookie cutter every single same vehicle, see what the needs are. Leasing is an option. It's not what I prefer, but it is an option, and it's also a good way to save funds. So with that being said, there'll also be automotive parts. I'm looking at that to do a citywide price agreement because we have multiple fleets in different departments. It's not just all one. And also with the food, I know that there is some statewide price agreements, but there's also the CES agreements for food. That's another one we'll look into. There's multiple commodities that we really need to resource to do the citywide agreements. And I began to start that now. Again, with all this happening, it's probably going to benefit everybody at this point. So if there's any questions, I'll take questions from any of you all that you got.
Thank you for that, Fran. I just wanted to share that information because I think it's a really good piece to the puzzle. I know there's a lot more that we are going to be doing, but I think that's important, and I don't think it has been done.
Right. The excitement is that we launched one. There's one right now. So we can only, like I said, we do one, the rest shall follow.
Excellent. And I think that's all I have for now. Curious more about, as we look at positions, how that's going to play out. We've been there before. Some of us have been on the council. It's really challenging. And then also benefits and how to make adjustments to the healthcare coverage. Yeah, so I'll yield the floor. Thanks.
Okay, Councilwoman Casas Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding benefits, this actually might be a question that we'll have to talk to Bernadette about. I know that we are a self-insured plan. Have we looked at potentially the kind of, if it might be beneficial to move away from the self-insured plan, given how much that could potentially cost us at this point with the pandemic coming on?
Given the current scenario of increased healthcare costs related to the public health crisis, we have not looked at that. So what we can do is in future finance committee meetings, we can invite our benefits consultant, Aon. They did provide us a presentation last year about our benefits and the plan. And we can do that again, but this time in light of our current healthcare crisis that we're facing. I think that would be wise.
And then, as Councilor Romero-Worth and Burial mentioned, I'm also curious about those 2,000 POs, talking to our different departments on projects, looking at, for example, our capital improvement projects, those that have gotten started, those that are going to be deemed as crucial, as I mentioned, mission critical, things that we really need to be moving forward with and making those decisions. So if we can be getting information from all the different departments on what those projects look like, what those POs are, where they are in the project, and based on the director's assessments of what they feel needs to move forward, what that priority list looks like now, knowing that priority list has to be a lot tighter. I think that would be something that could be really helpful moving forward.
Absolutely. What we can provide, it sounds like we're mapping out our next few finance committee meetings as well as we move through the questions from each of the different counselors. So what we can ask is for Regina to provide an update. I think she provides an update to the Public Works Committee on a regular basis as to the status of each of the projects. But I think if we want to have her present to the Finance Committee, what would be a really good presentation is to understand what money is encumbered and what projects already have shovels in the ground and what is not started at this point. And I say this because likely there will be a special legislative session, which will be looking at the capital outlay dollars that have been allocated to the city and what has been spent and what has not been spent. And so I think if in short order, we start to look at the capital projects, not from the perspective of what the plans are for a multi-year period, but from as of the third quarter, as of today, at the end of the third quarter, what do we have spent? What do we have encumbered? Where are shovels already in the ground? I think would be.
And that was also my other question, do we foresee the state clawing back more of that money that they have dedicated to these projects? We know that they already did. The governor vetoed some of the capital improvement money that we were supposed to get, or most of it. Do we foresee that also coming forward in the future with the special legislative session that we assume will happen?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Cassett Sanchez, more than likely, yes, that is what we have to look forward to in our future. So I think having this body have the understanding of what funds have already been spent, what is already encumbered, what shovels are in the ground, I think that would be helpful information going into a legislative session where there is a possibility of capital outlay dollars being swept back.
Mr. Chairman, on that point,
Go ahead, Councilor Merrill-Worth.
sorry, Councilor Sanchez, I think it's not just what shovels are in the ground, but what percentage of where we are in the completion of the project. So it's not just that they're started, but it's like, are they almost done to the point where, it would be silly not to finish? And, and some of them may just be a shovel in the ground where, we're not going to be able to move forward because there's just too much to be done. So I think some sense of, I don't know what the right words are, but, where we are in terms of completion, what percentage complete is the project? Sorry.
No problem.
Okay, go ahead, Councilor
Oh, sorry.
Cassett.
So my last question just has to do with, I know that we just transferred some money from the rail yard fund over to the general fund. And I think, Mary, you mentioned that this is something else that you're looking at. Where else do we have flexibility within these funds? And that would also be something that I'd really be interested in hearing more about and potentially having a presentation on is, what does that look like? Where are the recommendations for, if we need to, what are the first funds that we start to look at reallocating for making sure that we keep the city running?
Right, and Mary, that's something that we'll get into next. There's a whole list of things like that we need to cover. But I just want to focus right now on just the existing fiscal year. Anything else, Councilor Cassett Sanchez?
No, that is all. I yield the video.
Okay, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts. So I know that Ms. McCoy, you probably pretty much, because budget hearings were to start in a couple of weeks, there's probably a complete reworking of the budget that you've been working on. I don't know if how you're working on that is to look at, we might as well get realistic early. Are we looking at a 10%, a 15%, and a 20% reduction scenario in budget? All of those different scenarios?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Lindell, at this point, we do have an FY21 budget, base budget that was established when the crisis hit about 2 weeks ago. The budget staff had been working extremely diligently and in collaboration with department directors and the mayor and the city manager to put this package together. At this point, what we've had them do, instead of, because we were going to project an increase in revenue, a slight increase, but given the state of the economy, we were projecting an increase in revenue. We were also considering additional investments. So realistically, the entire month of February, we spent discussing with department directors and staff the different priorities and the different investment ideas throughout each of the different departments. Unfortunately, at this point, we have had to put a pin in that and actually start to completely reverse our thinking about what, as you were indicating, what are going to be some of our primary areas for revenue projection. Where do we see that? Is it a 10%? Is it a 20%? You may recall from some of the prior presentations that the finance team has given to this committee, over the course of the last recession, over the course of 3 years, the city lost 15 million in GRT revenue alone. And so again, we are unsure, as the second quarter report states, at this point, the magnitude and the duration of this crisis. We know it will be steep. It's like the rug has been pulled out from underneath. And unlike last time when there was that 15 million did decrease over multiple years. So at this point, we are expecting, as we were sharing with you earlier, the actual revenue in the month of April to be significantly under what we were expecting. So this is an immediate FY20 issue. So at this point, we are pivoting to from the FY21 base budget and the revenue projections. Again, as you mentioned, is it going to be 10%, 15, 20% lower? And where is that? Where are we going to see those decreases? Is it in the utility funds? But the utility funds continue to provide residential services. But as we see businesses potentially closing in the future, that might impact services that the utilities provide to the commercial sector. So we're going to potentially see a decrease to the utility funds as well. So that will be a different impact than the impact to the general fund and our revenue sources in the general fund. So I guess what I'm saying in short order is we understand that the revenue, we do not know the impact of the revenue at this time. We know that it will impact different funds and different revenue sources at different paces. But right now, our priority is addressing our FY20 condition and where we are going to start and how we are going to start working collaboratively with our budget team and our directors and the city manager and the mayor to make the adjustments that we need to make. And then as soon as we have stabilized and we feel like we have a good plan for the remaining 3 months of the fiscal year, then we can pivot to and resume our planning for FY21, as we do know a little bit more about how this is going to bottom out, if it's going to be a steep V curve and we're going to drop very quickly. And then as soon as the economy gets restarted and we're all able to go out into the public, whether it's a couple of 2 or 3 or 4 months, the V then starts to bounce back up. Or if we just see a steep decline and then a flat line of that. At this point, we don't know for FY21. So it's a little bit premature to start that when we do have revenue decreases in the current year that we have to address.
Councilor Romero Worth, did you need to add something real quick?
Well, I just was also thinking while you were talking, Mary, it's going to be really important for us to understand what kind of federal money is coming to the state. And I know there's going to be help for local governments, and that may be a little bit of a I don't know, escape hatch, for lack of a better way to phrase it. But and I think once we have a clearer picture too of our financial situation, I think we'll be in a better position also to suggest to the legislature what would be critical for our continued operation and providing the essential services to the community. So just wanted to add that, and particularly at the federal level, we're going to need to know what kinds of things we might be eligible for.
Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilor Romero Worth. I think that
It's okay.
We've been through this a few years ago where we dug out of a $15 million hole. It wasn't any fun at all. And this one may be even less fun. My thoughts are that nothing is too small to consider. And, we've been talking about fleets. Okay, well, here's an idea. Maybe we don't buy new cars for a year. Maybe we say, you know what? We're not going to be buying a new fleet this year. If we can limp along for an extra year with these cars, then maybe that's what we have to do instead of spending $700,000-800,000 next year on cars or trucks. I know we have a schedule for it, but I think that those are the kinds of considerations that we need to go to, that nothing is too small to be considered a place to save money, because I think we're going to need to save a crazy amount of money. to keep just the basics going. I don't want to be the prophet of doom here, but I want to be realistic. I'd love to be wrong, but you know, let's be prepared for the worst and hope for the best. And in hoping for the best, you know, when you're treading water and trying to find your way out of this, it's hard to be looking to the future and planning for when we recover from this. It's really hard to, but that's a really important part of this also, is having, you know, in the last recession when we got the TARP program, having projects that were in fact shovel ready and projects that we could move ahead on quickly and that we were eligible for those monies. So looking, you know, planning for the recovery is also part of planning for how we get out of this. And I know it's hard to do when we're in the midst of it, but those are 2 points from me, that nothing is too small to look at, to save money on, because I can tell you, we were down to the $30, $40, $50,000 when we did this the last time, which doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, but when you're trying to dig out a 15 million, you're looking everywhere you can look. And I think that we need to be very, 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 very careful about any new programming, any new expenditures, and just how to maintain what we have, as well as making sure that we're well positioned for the recovery. So, Chair, I'd like to spend more time talking about this, but those are just my initial thoughts with it. And I will say that last time around, we were not able to dig our way out of $15 million with extra existing unfilled positions, and we won't be able to do it this time either. So those are my initial thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lindell. And I guess that's a good segue into the next item on our agenda, which is planning for the budget. I sent out an email earlier, a couple of hours ago, with just a list of questions I have and information that I want regarding budget and budget cuts. I had a discussion with the mayor the other day, and what I don't want is, I don't want, Mary, you and the staff and the mayor for that matter, to go through all this work putting together budget cuts without any input or information from us. And then you bring it to us and we're like, well, how come you decided to cut here? Or where did this come from? Or can we even do that? And then we spend a lot of our time, and it'll be critical when it finally comes to us. We spend most of our time arguing over those things as opposed to things of real substance that you already have the answers to, or you already have taken care of. But since no one was communicating with us along the way, we're asking all these questions, and it's kind of late to be asking them. And so I don't know if any of the other members of the committee saw my email, but I think we really need to start thinking about information we want as a committee going forward. Councilor Lindell.
Chair, did you send that to all of us?
I think I did. I thought I did. I don't know with my Outlook if it.
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it. Did it go to Ms. McCoy?
Yes, I did receive a copy.
Would you, Councilor Abeta, is it okay with you if she forwards it to the rest of the committee?
Yes, I meant to send it to all of the committee, but it was late this afternoon. And what it is, did anybody from the committee get it, or just Mary?
I did not receive it, Chair.
Okay.
I
So
think
Mary,
that would
if
be helpful.
you can forward that email, that would be great, because what I want to do, if possible, is compile a list of issues, things that we would like information on. And then I like to actually set up a subcommittee of members of the Finance Committee and have the subcommittee meet in between Finance Committee meetings and then bring back reports. And I actually would like Councilor Romero Worth and Councilor Lindell to sit on that subcommittee. The rest of us could join it, especially if it's an area we're interested in, like Councilor Cassett Sanchez talked about health, Councilor Villarreal talked about procurement. But to me, it would be really helpful, like I said, Mary, if we can start working on this and at least giving you our ideas and what we're concerned with. And then hopefully when you're developing the budget with the mayor and Jarrell, you could say, hey, this is what the finance committee is concerned with or looking at. And so, because like I said, I want to have a smooth as possible budget hearings, because we've done a lot of this work ahead of time and not, I don't want to see this massively cut budget for the first time at budget hearings. I don't think that's fair to any of us.
Agreed.
Thoughts from the committee? Councilor Romero Worth, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I would just also, I wonder if there's some principles that we, or some values that we could all agree on as we go into this, and whether that would be appropriate. Like, something along the lines, I think Councilor Lindell suggested, that new programs aren't going to be highly looked upon. I think protecting to the greatest extent we can the employees that we have will be very important. And I think, as Ms. McCoy said, making sure that we're providing the city's essential services are also going to be really important filters for us. So I don't know, those are just a few that come to the top of my head, but maybe there are, a handful of things that as we look at this task ahead of us, they help guide us and help us, make these really tough decisions that we are likely to be facing.
Thank you. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you clarify what you said about subcommittees? Is it based on certain topics?
I think it could be either one. I just want to make sure that a few of us are working between finance committee meetings and really digging into the details. So it could be on certain topics. We could have a group meet, or we could have the same ones meeting, and then we can join in when we see a topic that we're really interested in. Because if you look at the email that Mary sent to us, there's 20 items, and I'm sure you're going to come up with more, the committee members, because I can think of everything. And then what we can do is we can kind of categorize them, and then we can decide, well, who's really interested in these topics or sit on that, or we could, like I said, just have a subcommittee that's made up of 2 or 3 of us to work on them, and then the others can join in on for the topics we're really interested in. Ms. Martin, you need to take your thing off of mute. Go ahead.
Sorry about that, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to remind the chair and the committee that if you have 3 members together, even between finance committees, it constitutes a quorum, and you'll have to have minutes and an open meeting and everything just as if it's a regular committee. So you take that in consideration that with a subcommittee, it will have to be an open meeting if you have a quorum, and that's 3.
Okay, so if we did a subcommittee, we'd have to have 2 members.
Yes, and no one else would be able to join unless somebody stepped off, unless you wanted to notice it as a public meeting. And then you could
Okay.
have 3. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Well, then, I mean, that's what I was thinking about, but then I guess if there's topics, who would we be meeting with? You?
It would be Mary, and asking her to go and get us this information that we want, or let's talk about this topic, because she may have topics that she already has information to give us.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how that works with Mary and her schedule of
Mr.
all
Chair.
the other things she has to figure out, meeting with staff and then meeting with us in this like subcommittee kind of setting.
Okay.
This is absolutely one of our priorities, both for the city manager, the mayor, us and our staff, department directors going forward. I don't think we want to do across the board 10% cuts, which is very rudimentary and basic. we really want to take a more sophisticated approach and really be able to understand, the impact of the decisions that we're making, not just on our staff, but on our constituents, right? On the folks that you all represent.
Right, and that's my concern. The more sophisticated the response is, the more we need to be involved in it, I think.
Well, and Mr. Chair, I mean, maybe what we should be, it sounds like there's a bit of interest in this among all the members, as you would imagine there would be. And maybe what we need to do is look at just having a few more finance committee meetings, just adding a few more to the calendar, if we all want to dive into this, and given the open meetings requirements, and of course we want to comply with that. So that might be, maybe we add another meeting in between. So we meet once a month, correct?
Twice.
Once or twice.
You eat twice a month.
Twice.
Yeah, so maybe we should look at adding 1 or 2 meetings. I don't know.
And then we could put the schedule together and notice them all
Yeah.
between now and the budget hearing, so we meet those requirements. That's a good idea.
Easier, yeah.
And Mr. Chairman and councilors, just to review the schedule as we go forward, the FY21 budget is due to DFA by June 1st. As Alexis Lotero, the budget director, and I spoke with the head of local government today, and he did confirm that the budgets are still due. However, I believe, as I mentioned previously to the governing body, the DFA is allowing us to submit our FY20 budget as a placeholder for FY21. And then what we can do is through our quarterly reporting and our budget adjustments, the first of which is due on July 31st to DFA, we can continue to revise our budget as we understand the economic impact and the impact to the city's revenue streams as we go forward, and almost take this on a month-by-month basis. But very similar to how you all approve the budget adjustments every 2 weeks, we then compile that as an amended budget and submit that to DFA on a regular basis. And that is what Donnie and Brenda from DFA recommended that we do going forward. We are also going to be having a series of meetings with the Municipal League and the local government division, together with other finance and budget directors throughout the state, to garner ideas and understand how other local governments are dealing with this crisis as well. So a few things that I would like to point out on that is that I think the conversation today has really focused around expenditures and what expenditure levers we have to pull during this crisis going forward. I would also like to point out a few areas where expenditures are already set. For example, bond proceeds. The 2018 GRT bond has to be spent. 85% of that revenue has to be spent within 3 years. That is a solid amount of revenue. It can almost be seen as a counter-cyclical measure if we continue forward with those capital expenditures in our community. Same goes for the gas tax bond, the last gas tax bond. I think Regina and her team have been continuously updating you on the progress with that revenue source. So those are expenditures that will continue to move forward and continue to support expenditures in our community. That being said, an additional support to our community that this committee can also look at are changes to the procurement code. Where do we want to focus our policy changes to support our local businesses, our local or our small businesses in Santa Fe? And how do we change the procurement code and those small and local business preferences to support our community here? So that's another policy change that we could bring forward in these discussions and understand the impact to expenditures if we do make those changes. In addition, glad that
Mary?
Councilor, yes.
I'm sorry, and just on that point, I think that's where it's going to be really important to understand what help the federal government is going to be having, so that we can, make the most of changes that we're doing in tandem with the help that we're getting, from the federal stimulus packages, so that we have the biggest oomph that's possible And so that's why it's, again, just to reiterate the point, it's going to be really important to understand what help we're going to get from the state and from the feds.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the point. That was the next bullet point that I had taken notes on while you were speaking earlier, Councilor Romero-Worth. That federal money, as we have seen in the Families First Act and the $2 trillion package that was passed last week, are essentially in different categories. And the more the city can align our priorities along with those categories, the better our chances are to receive that federal support in the months ahead. So as we are looking at sites, around the city, as New York has done and as other communities have done, Seattle, to be able to house different emergency response or corona or COVID positive patients. I think those are the areas where we look to see the most immediate reimbursements and most definite reimbursements. But as we are supporting businesses or renters, or as we are looking at our community as a whole, I think to understand where the federal money is allocated in those two packages, senior meals, for example, that will also inform where some of our budget priorities are for FY21. And then the third, so that's really a revenue package and a revenue lever, and not necessarily an expenditure lever. Another revenue lever that is also extremely important that you also alluded to, Councilor Romero-Worth, is the potential help that we can get from the state government. That being said, I want to point out two areas where, if we're starting to compile a legislative package ahead of a special session, that we would like to focus on. Primarily is the internet sales tax. In the current year, and again for next year, we are seeing is a flat disbursement on a monthly basis of $62,000 of GRT. This was the legislature's effort to close the internet sales tax loophole. So while the state gathers information about how the internet sales tax is distributed throughout local governments, they have used a methodology that enables the city of Santa Fe to receive a flat $62,000 per month for FY20 and FY21. And so as part of our legislative package, we look forward to encouraging the Taxation and Revenue Department and the governor's office to actually make those adjustments in real time in FY21. We know a lot of our commerce now is being pushed from bricks and mortar to the internet. And so if we can take advantage of that increase in GRT from closing that internet sales tax loophole in FY21 and not wait until FY22, that is an additional revenue lever that we could push. In addition to that, there are certain funds, as Councilor Caswit-Sanchez was referring to, that such as the rail yard fund, that we can look to support general expenses, general municipal purpose expenses. Right now, most of those funds are authorized in city ordinance. However, there are a few funds, such as the lodger's tax, that are actually governed by state statute. And so as we look forward to building our legislative agenda and our legislative requests, it would be to see how we can, for this time, broaden the allowable uses for our balances in the lodger's tax. And so again, that would be something that would require a state statute, a change to state statute, as opposed to something that this body could do via change to city ordinance. So that's really where we would be looking to work collaboratively and put forward a plan to our legislative delegation to support as they go into a special session. And these are changes that we would hope could be effective in FY21. So we could see that additional revenue coming into the city as well. And we look forward again to other ideas that come up as these two have, so we can take a more comprehensive legislative package. And I really do believe that as we move forward and have these conversations with other municipalities, other local government entities like the county, more of these ideas will pop up as we start these conversations together.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal, you still have the floor.
I think just hearing that is music to my ears about lodger's tax and changing that. But I thought that had to be something that we voted on as, it's not something that you change at the constitutional level. Maybe Councilor Romero-Worth knows, but I think there's been always this idea of lodger's tax being able to be used and dispersed and looking at the community benefit as it also benefits tourism. But I thought there was more to it than that, than just changing it. I mean, I'd love to see this. I'm just curious if there's more, if there actually has to be something that the constituents of New Mexico have to vote on.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Villarreal, we can work with our city attorney to look into that as we continue to flesh out these ideas. And again, these are ideas at this point. These are, every idea is being brought to the table and considered. These are two that we're considering at this time. And we will work with our city attorney's office as well as our city lobbyist to pursue these further. It is also set in city ordinance, so we would also have to change city ordinance, but state statute is the key here.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really, looks like a lot of my questions have already been answered from the previous discussion. So thank you very much. I was really, curious again about looking at those levers that we can be pulling and looking at what's going to be happening at the state level. So it sounds like we already had those discussions and you're on top of it. So thank you very much, Mary, for making sure that we have our fingers on the pulse of everything that's about to be happening. I yield the video.
Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mary. I appreciate the email that you've sent out and the topics, the way that they're listed. I think that it's important for us to start work on this as a committee. And, all the comments, I think that we're all pretty well braced for what we're in for. And, putting off acknowledging it and working on it doesn't help. I think that we need to get working on this immediately. And I would encourage that the entire council be kept informed about what we're thinking about, what we're looking at. And I don't think anybody wants to read about any of this in the newspaper instead of hearing about it internally and discussing it and working on it. And I think that's really important for us to work on this together and everybody have input and know that it's kind of a long, hard process. But those are just my comments. It's time for us to work on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Lindell. So if you can take a look at the email over the next few days, add some things that are missing. And then we need to talk about the best way to proceed with getting this information to the Finance Committee. And I think it's gonna benefit both ways. Obviously, it's gonna keep us informed, but it's also gonna inform you, Mary, and the manager and the mayor about what our perspective is as a Finance Committee. And so I think if, like what's been said, the sooner we can get this information and start working on these things, the better. And if the committee has ideas, the best way to do this, it sounds like right now we might have to look at additional Finance Committee meetings. So if you can start taking a look at that, Mary, and we can start polling the committee members about, well, maybe it's one more a month or two more. And then obviously, if we can keep stuff on the consent calendar, then maybe we can tackle some of these things during our regular schedule meeting also. So I appreciate the committee members calling and getting questions asked ahead of time with today's meeting, because we were able to focus on the things of substance that are really important to us. Councilor Casa Sanchez.
Thank you. Just real quick question about, you mentioned updating this document. Is there a way that you would like to do this that there's not, 5 different versions of the same document that then somebody has to compile and we are get, is there any shared drive we could use or anything like that, since we have to do this all virtually at this point?
I'm not that sophisticated, so I don't know, but I don't mind being the one compiling it. So if everybody just wants to reply to me, then I have the master. I don't mind adding it.
Is Google Docs a possibility within the city? Because then nobody has to compile.
I'm sure. Mary? You're on
You're
mute.
muted, Mary.
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Casowitz Sanchez, we are all adjusting to this remote work environment. So what our team has recently been testing is Microsoft Office 365, which is, the link is available on the city's intranet page. So as you all are looking for ways to continue to collaborate and move forward, I would recommend the Microsoft version of shared documents is Office 365. So you can create a Word document and share that. You can create a calendar and share that. You can also create an Excel document so we can all look at or work on as well. So that is something the finance team has been getting adjusted to as well in these last few days.
So Mary, can you put this document that I sent on there right away?
I sure can, and then I can share it with the committee members as well.
Okay.
I'm not too sophisticated, so we might have to get IT to assist us with this as we all learn.
Okay, Councilwoman Romero Worth.
So how does this work with open meetings? Like, how do we collaborate on a document that's not public? We might need to
Good
ask
question.
the city attorney's office.
Will you look into that for us, Mary?
Mr. Chairman, Councilor Romero Worth, yes, I will ask Aaron.
Okay, any other questions? No, thank you again. I think this was a very productive meeting. Then with that, we are adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Stay well, everybody.
You too.